The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1938. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1938, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to financing and operation of state and local government, the second engrossment.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Gomez, to explain the bill.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. It's my honor today to be bringing House File 1938 to the floor, which is our tax budget bill. This bill constitutes the largest tax cut in Minnesota history, regardless of what you may have heard. It contains targeted tax cuts. It puts money in the pockets of the Minnesotans who most need it. It contains all of Representative Dave Lislegard's incredible property tax division report, which is laser focused on property tax cuts and assistance to cities in response to what I'm sure that we've all heard in our communities, which is that, you know, home valuations are going up, property tax bills are going up right along with them. And this is related, of course, to the decisions that have been made in this body to not keep up with the costs of operating local government. So Representative Lislegard's, Chair Lislegard's property tax division report has permanent, ongoing property tax refunds targeted at folks who need it the most. It contains a transformational change to property tax refunds for renters, which Representative Coulter authored. And so it changes the property tax refund to a refundable income tax credit. And this is a really important simplification and fairness change to our tax code. Right now, there are over 100,000 low-income renters who are eligible for a property tax refund, who just because of the timing and the paperwork and like the complication and the barriers leave that money on the table. So this is going to be a huge change, and it's really going to make our tax code more legible, more fair, and more equitable. As I said, it funds our cities and our counties. It adds $100 million a year each to local government aid and county program aid that goes across the state to help our local governments function, to help them keep their obligations to their residents and our residents. It contains local aids for housing and homelessness to respond to these dire crises that folks in our communities are experiencing. So this is, as I said, the largest tax cut in Minnesota history. It focuses on those who need it. This bill is going to improve lives. It's going to make our tax code more simple and more fair. It focuses on families and on children who are in poverty and on seniors who are struggling economically. And it helps us take steps toward that goal that that Governor Walz laid out for us of making Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family. And I look forward to more discussion about this great bill. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Gomez is moving to amend House File 1938, the second engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded A56.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Gomez, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an author's amendment. It's 7 lines long. You know, the first couple lines fix an error in the Social Security exemption. The next couple lines outline that we were able to make our working family and child tax credit much more generous. And then the last couple of lines are changes to the taxpayer assistance amounts in the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any discussion to the Gomez amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Engen moves to amend House File number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A58.
Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. My A58 amendment is, in my belief, a way to show that every Minnesotan can have a little bit more support in some uncertain times. It would actually expand the list of infant care items that are exempt from state sales tax collections, and it would give a school supplies
1938.
sales tax holiday this August for 15 days so that folks can go out and buy those items that they need to ensure that they have everything that's on that school supplies list. Prices are up. People are struggling.
Okay.
I don't think that this amendment picks winners and losers. It just tells every Minnesota family that we're going to be supporting them throughout some hard times. So I would appreciate a green vote. Thank you. And
There
request
is
a
an
roll call.
amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Engen moves to amend his amendment to House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A64.
Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This was just a clarifying amendment to my amendment so that we have the correct data as to how much we're going to be giving folks relief. So again, I'd ask for a green vote. Thank you.
Discussion on the Engen amendment to the amendment. Representative Gomez.
This is a technical amendment. Please vote green.
All those in favor of the Engen amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. Further discussion. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Engen, for bringing this forward. This isn't something that we heard in our committee or that there was a bill about, but I'm interested in the idea, and I would like to bring it into conference, and so I would urge members to vote aye on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Representative Engen.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. Really appreciate those words, and I think this is just a very common sense solution during some hard times. So appreciate a green vote.
All those in favor of the Engen amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Olson B moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A18.
The member from Martin, Representative Olson, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is once again an opportunity for individuals here on this House floor to make good on promises that were made this last summer and into the fall as we were entering the campaign season. And this would do it in a very responsible way. So this is, once again, the full exemption of the Social Security tax, and it's done in a way that would be progressively increased as we have budget surpluses. So it's going into the future. In the future, we have a budget surplus. We are then able to scale back the taxation on Social Security in order to exempt more and more and more people. Because the way that this is currently written is still a way in which it is not entirely helpful to the middle class seniors. Now, we've heard many times that on this House floor there is in fact a senior citizen who pays taxes on a middle class amount of money, and he said that he's fine with it and it wasn't actually all that much. But what I will tell you is that I know a man. He was born in the year 1928. He's now 94 years old. He'll turn 95 in June. And he graduated from high school, went to college. He was drafted into the Korean conflict. He fought against communism. He came home after the war. He got married. He raised a family. He farmed his entire life. He lost his farm during the farm crisis. He bought it back. He worked hard every single day of his life, members. He didn't retire until he was nearly 85. He now lives in a rest home, and he does not make enough money in order to cover the cost of his rest home. Now, members, let me tell you what happens when that occurs. When you do not have enough money to cover the cost of your long-term health care, the state will help you But if you own farmland or any form of assets, the state will sell it. Now, members, that's my grandfather. My grandfather's 95 years old in June. He worked his entire life. He paid Social Security taxes his entire life. He lost his farm. He bought it back. Hard work every single day. Had to get his knees replaced when he was in his 70s because he didn't have time to walk places. He ran across the farmyard because he didn't have the time to waste. Raised hundreds of head of cattle and sheep and pigs, farmed hundreds of acres, and he accomplished something. The American dream, members, the American dream. And now that American dream is being threatened. Now, I'm not saying that fully exempting the Social Security tax on him would allow him to be able to afford his health care. His health care is very expensive, and as a family, we've had to actually increase the amount of rent that we pay. So I farm with my grandpa. We've had to do things to make ends meet on those areas. The same thing occurred with my other grandfather on my father's side. He actually cost more, his care cost more than what we were actually able to pay in his rent, plus his Social Security and everything all combined. It was still $40,000 short of what he was costing. And so, members, that was a real strain on my family. You talk about, people like to talk about farmers having all sorts of money every once in a while. Well, we're dirt rich and we're cash poor, and that really hurt my family. That really hurt it. I don't know how we made it through. But in the end, we made it through. My grandfather passed away, the other grandfather, passed away in 2020, and so we no longer have to pay for his care, and that's a sad thing. Members, we need to do this. This is the right thing to do. The greatest generation went off to war. They fought for our freedom. They raised families, good families. They educated their families. They created what we have today. They have blessed us with what we have today. Let's get off their backs. We've been on their backs, riding the greatest generation for generations. It's time to pick up the mantle ourselves and become that great generation. We may not be able to surpass them because, members, they were a pretty great generation. But it's time for us to do our part. I'm so tired of people saying, let's take the money from the seniors. Because, members, taking money from my 94-year-old grandfather is worse than taking candy from a baby. Because a baby may grow up and then has a shot at buying candy someday. My grandfather no longer has the capacity to work. You take the money from him, he cannot get any more. Members, vote green in order to fulfill your promises in a responsible way, to get off the backs of the greatest generation, pick up the mantle, and let's be a great generation ourselves. Thank you, members.
Discussion on the Olson Amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Olson. So a few things. First of all, our approach to Social Security in our tax bill will ensure that more than 3/4 of seniors, 76% of seniors who are collecting Social Security benefits will pay no tax on those benefits. This includes couples filing jointly who make $100,000, who make up to $100,000 a year. And I'm sorry about your family being one of the many, I would say, millions of victims of a profit-motivated healthcare system and a real failure of us collectively to care for elderly people, for disabled people, for young people who are in really tough financial circumstances. I would dispute that a few $100s a year would substantively impact, somebody who's facing long-term care costs, nursing home costs that are just really, out of control. In part, again, because people are pulling profit out of all of those systems. And that's a policy choice that we make. So this is an interesting kind of approach to paying for this incredibly costly initiative. So the budget reserve, you're taking the money out of the November forecast. So I'm just going to read because I learned a lot about this in preparing for today. When there's a balance in the November forecast, and historically these have been used to pay back shifts, to pay back borrowed funds from other non-general fund accounts, but it has not been used to do what is proposed here and what's proposed elsewhere in these amendments, which is to be used for permanent tax reductions, because these are, by definition, not the kind of revenues, so to speak, that you can make permanent decisions with. They're one-time dollars. And there is, in 16A.152, there are a number of kind of actions that have to be taken before you can do anything else with a November forecast positive unrestricted balance. And so what that means is that a positive balance in the November forecast means that we can make up for budget trickery and for gimmicks and for shifts. What we're doing here is using a budget gimmick to pay for an incredibly expensive ongoing expense. And so just kind of out of the gate, I want to say that. And there's a reason that we're doing the proposal for a full Social Security exemption in this way. And I'll tell you why it is. It's because our approach to Social Security treatment, where 76% of seniors would pay no Social Security tax, a couple making up to $100,000 would pay no Social Security tax. In the first biennium, it costs $409.2 million, still a lot of money. Doing the full Social Security subtraction, so to pay for those top 20% of seniors, would cost $1.26 billion in the first biennium. Our approach to Social Security in the second biennium costs $478.7 million. The full exemption in the out biennium is $1.495 billion. It's almost $1 billion of difference. And so I asked this question in committee. If you are proposing to spend an extra $1 billion in the out biennium on the top 20% of income earners, 4% of income earners, then you're choosing them as winners, and who are we choosing as losers in this bill? Because if we were kind of going about this honestly, then you would have to come into my bill and cut $1 billion in the out biennium. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we spend that $1 billion on in the out biennium, because I think that you'll find it, logical and targeted and like spending that we can all agree on. In the out biennium, we spend that $1 billion on property tax refunds for people who are having trouble managing those bills. 45% of people who get homestead property tax refunds are elders and people with disabilities. 45% of those. Those are our lowest income seniors who we could spend this $1 billion in the out biennium and they would see no benefit whatsoever. We could do that. That would be a choice. And that's what's being advocated for, but we're not having an honest conversation about it. I talked to you about changing the property tax rebates for renters from this separate process and making it a refundable income tax credit. Well, 35% of people who get the property tax refund for renters are seniors and those with disabilities. People have a wrong idea about who renters are in our state. Renters are people of all ages and of all backgrounds and of all income levels. They are more likely to be low income, and this is why our investment in them is so important. If you wanted to spend $1 billion on the top 20% of income earners, of seniors, then you would have to cut local government aid. You would have to go to your cities and your counties and tell them, we know that for 20 years, our investment in our local government partners, we have violated our contract with them that we made during the Minnesota Miracle. And we have not kept up with the cost of providing those critical public services. And so many of us in here were local elected officials before joining this body, and so we know what it means when the state does not keep up with its obligations to our local government partners, that our residents suffer. So I would urge a red vote on this amendment. I think, and we've worked a lot on this issue. We've talked a lot about this issue. We have come up with a balanced approach that is more legible for people so that they can understand if they're paying taxes on Social Security or not. And we've balanced that both with investments in our budget, in our tax budget, and these tax cuts that are targeted to those who actually need it. And we are in other places in our budget, in Chair Noor's committee, we're making historic investments in nursing homes and long-term care facilities and making sure that the people who are charged with the care of our elders are actually compensated adequately. So, I guess we have to take a global look at what we're doing here when we're talking about, an extra $1 billion, an extra $800 million. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please vote no on the amendment.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We all in the last election cycle, many of us made comments, made promises. They talked about what we were going to do with this massive surplus. I don't know of anyone who said, we're going to spend it all. I don't know of a single person who was campaigning on that idea. I do know the majority of the individuals on this side of the aisle campaigned on the idea of fully exempting Social Security. And I know that there is more than a handful of individuals on the other side who said, we need to fully exempt Social Security. This is your opportunity to do so, members. Now, as soon as the election results came out, we saw a really awkward moonwalk out of the room. People started revamping their comments. We started saying, members, less than 50% of Minnesota seniors pay taxes on their Social Security anyways. You know why, members? Because anyone who can afford to leave this state does. Anyone who can afford to leave the state of Minnesota in their retirement does. That's why less than 50% of Minnesotans pay taxes on their Social Security today. And we will continue to lose those immensely important individuals. The generation that has the knowledge, the generation that's passing the baton to the next generation, we will lose those individuals at a rate that you cannot even imagine. We've already seen half of them leave. Only half of Minnesota seniors pay Social Security tax. Yeah, anyone who can afford to leave does. Anyone. Now, members, I think it's funny when we're talking about calling this a gimmick or a way that we're doing something that's never been done before. We're taking the money and we're paying for it in a way that it's not meant to do that. Members, we're paying for so much stuff this year that has never been done before in a way that is almost unimaginable. We are raising taxes on Minnesotans to the tune of tens of billions. Billions of dollars, 3.5 in the Transportation Committee. We've got 9.5 here. We've got 2.2 there. We've got billions of dollars worth of tax cuts or tax expenses and no cuts. We'll say substitutions or we'll say credits. I like that. We really like credits. We've got some of that. But members, we are seeing massive spending, 30% increase in our state's spending this biennium. I've never even imagined something so large in a way that I've never even conceived of being possible. So to say that we don't do this is just inaccurate because, members, 90% of the things we do here are ways that we don't do it, and we've never done it before. So that's a poor argument. Members, this is the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do. We don't need the money. Maybe you think you do. The state does not. We need to get off the backs of our seniors. Encourage them to stay here. Encourage them to spend their retirement here. Tell them that we would love to have you in our state. Members, I already know how you're going to vote. We've already had you press your red button. We already know. So I will not ask for a roll call. But we know where you stand. Minnesotans know where you stand. And Minnesotans know how valuable your word is. So be careful when you say a promise next time.
The member from Dakota, Representative Kosnick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the amendment to deliver on the promise that many of us made to eliminate the tax on Social Security income for our seniors. And we had an answer from the majority, the author of the tax bill, talking about all the other things that we spend money on in this state. Well, they're not intrinsically tied together. It's more of a moral issue of double taxation on those that have worked long and hard in our state, and they would like to be like so many other states and not be taxed on their Social Security income. I would suggest to the chair of the tax committee, you could raise the exemption and still not deliver on your promise, but you could raise the exemption to those making $150,000, and you would include 99% of the seniors that are receiving Social Security income instead of 76%. Those that are at the higher income and are seniors that have worked hard, they deserve that. We shouldn't demoralize hard work and fiscal accountability. In fact, many of those seniors that might be at the higher incomes in my community are those that are volunteering, supporting our communities, working in our Lions clubs, our Rotary clubs, Kiwanis, our VFWs, and they're also the ones that are first to write checks to support our schools and their fundraisers. And so I don't think we should be engaging in this class warfare. It's double taxation. Our seniors across the state have asked us to eliminate that double taxation on their Social Security benefits. They've earned them, and we shouldn't be taking from them. It's amazing that we can't do more for our seniors, and that Democrats are breaking their campaign promise of eliminating Social Security tax repeal, especially when we have a historic surplus, and you look at the overall budget that's being thrown at us, that we're raising taxes $9.5 billion, and then raising fees to make it all closer to $10 billion. And so I appreciate the amendment, Representative Olson, and I would encourage members to vote yes.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Anderson P.E. moves to amend House File Number 1938, the first engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A35.
Thank you. This amendment...
Representative Anderson,
thank you.
to your amendment.
Thank you. This amendment does two things. It strips out the language on the e-poll tab from the bill, and it also adds language that says that the rules that were in effect at the time games were approved need to stay in effect unless this legislature by law changes them. And I want to start out, this was a shock, I think, to this side of the aisle, the members on the tax committee. There was no hearing on this provision, and it showed up in the Omnibus bill on a Monday morning when it was posted at 11 a.m. And our charities had until 5 o'clock on that day to learn about it, sign up, and come in and testify. So the process was horrible. It was very last minute. And it's clearly an attack on our charities. It's an attack on our bars and our restaurants. It's an attack on the employees that work for the charities, all the entities, all of our nonprofits that do such great things for our communities. We just handed out a list of 1,100 charities across Minnesota. This is from the Minnesota Gambling Control Board. There are 1,100 charities that do pull tabs in Minnesota. They are in every one of our districts, and they do amazing, amazing work. And they have since 2012. As you know, the history of this, in 2011 and 2012, this past legislators and Governor Dayton were trying to find a way to fund the Vikings Stadium. And there were lots of debates about other casinos and even a state-run casino. And in the end, this was what was chosen. It was to allow more charitable gambling in e-pull tabs and to use a significant chunk of that tax revenue to fund the stadium. And it has been successful. Last year, there were $4.5 billion that were spent, gambled on the games, and e-pull tabs are 54% of this. Charitable gaming brought in $180 million in tax revenue last year. $180 million. And charities donated over $130 million to things in our local communities. I know there was a bill 2 years ago that Rep. Stevenson had that was eliminating essentially electronic pull tabs. It didn't go anywhere. I think it passed this body, but that's about as far as it went. And there was a fiscal note on that, members. There was a fiscal note. And that fiscal note said that by eliminating e-pull tabs, it would reduce taxes significantly. It would reduce local wages for the gambling at about $36 million. It would reduce revenue to the bars that are getting rent in some cases from the charities at $29 million. It would reduce local sales taxes and local contributions. It's significant. And for some reason, this omnibus tax bill doesn't have a fiscal note. Because if we accept the language that's in this bill, you are going to see charitable gambling receipts drop anywhere from 25 to 60%. Those are the predictions. 25 to 60%. And you have $180 million in tax revenue. So let's say we go on the low end and we say it's a third. Then this omnibus bill should have a $60 million fiscal note on it if this provision stays in there. $60 million, but it's not in there. It's not. And I want to talk very briefly about why I think we're at this point. As we all know, there was a lawsuit, and then there was an overturned lawsuit, and it happened in about 2019. And the last suit essentially said that we could do nothing and everything is fine. Absolutely nothing. There was the Gambling Control Board had essentially created an unpromulgated, Harry, I need your help, where's Harry, rule, which meant that it didn't go through the rulemaking process. And that rule, which was in 2019, said, hey, we're going to allow slot machines with the open all feature forever. And that was what the lawsuit was about. And in the end, the court said that you couldn't do a rule like that. You had to do it essentially either no rule or something through rulemaking, because the language is vague. It can be read either way, and it's vague. And that's what they found. And so we find ourselves here today where one side of this debate is trying to have us legislate something that doesn't exist currently in state law. And it is something that will greatly, greatly, greatly harm our communities and harm our charities across the state. I want to give you some examples. Something that is White Bear, right near me. Merrick is a nonprofit. They do charitable gambling across Washington and Dakota counties. But one thing they also do is they serve 400 adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the proceeds from the charitable gambling go to help those 400 adults. They go to help equipment. They go to help a plastic recycling program that Representative Curran has talked about and advocated. That's where these charitable gaming funds go from that particular charity. Northern Minnesota, and I don't want to get into districts, but the Eveleth Elks Lodge, the Gilbert Fire Department, the Snow Devils, Middle Minnesota, the Optimist Club of St. Cloud, the St. Cloud Youth Hockey Association, the Eagles, Erie in St. Cloud, the VFWs in St. Cloud, the Golden Gloves boxing in St. Cloud, to areas like Mankato, the Nicollet Lions Club, the St. Peter Hockey Association. Closer to me, the city of Lexington, Lexington Fire Department. I have a letter from the Lexington Fire Department that says the Lexington Firemen's Relief Association operates gaming at Cowboy Salon, who also benefits. It's next door to the fire station. And the fire department, 17 members, relies on charitable gambling to pay for our fire trucks and our equipment. The following phrase is proudly printed on the outside of each of our apparatus. This truck was purchased at no expense to the taxpayers of the Lexington Firemen's Relief Association from charitable gambling proceeds. All 5 of the fire trucks in Lexington, Minnesota were 100% paid for with charitable gambling proceeds. Also close to my district, Blaine. The Blaine Festival has donated $7 million to people in need. $7 million. In youth sports, Anoka Ramsey Athletic Association. They say that a significant portion of their community outreach is funded by charitable gambling proceeds, a significant portion. And they give money to Anoka High School graduating seniors for scholarships, amongst many, many, many other things. Members, this bill, this language is a direct attack on our charities and our communities. It's not needed, it's worked, things have worked. Something else I want to mention, we're all, I think, very proud that the Viking Stadium is paid off 20 years in advance. That's an amazing, amazing accomplishment. But that Viking Stadium is going to have needs. They're going to have, at some point they're going to remodel it, at some point they're going to, and they've said that they are going to have needs. So they are still going to need tax revenue. And this gambling provision, as we've been doing it all along, is more than enough to pay for the needs. It's more than enough. Minnesota nonprofits rely on this. They rely on the dollars. There are youth hockey associations that have built arenas, and they're using the charitable gambling proceeds to pay the bonds. If this goes away, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? There are Legion posts who've renewed leases. And again, they're relying on these proceeds to pay that rent and to stay alive. There are bars and restaurants who have partnered, who are getting bits of rent from some of these nonprofits. And after what COVID did to our bars and restaurants over the last couple of years, why would we hit them again? These bars and restaurants, in many cases, have brought in internet, they've brought in more electricity, technology, they've had huge, huge upfront costs in some cases so that they could actually do this. And now this legislature wants to say, pull the rug out and say, no, you can no longer do that. And I'll quickly talk about the open all feature, because I think that's what we're talking about. And again, the courts found that the language is vague and that the Gambling Control Board, it's fine how they were interpreting it. And if the Gambling Control Board wants to make a rule in the future, they should use rulemaking, proper rulemaking. But in the meantime, it's fine. There's nothing that was done wrong. We have not been operating illegal charitable gambling for the last decade. It's fine the way it is. What are the differences between a tablet, an e-pull tab, and a slot machine? There are numerous differences. And the language from a decade ago specifies that. You can't have wheels rolling and those sort of things. let's see, you can't accept cash. That's a big thing. Battery operated, cabinets, spinning reels, the screens. And I play paper pull tabs once in a while. And an open all feature on a paper pull tab is you pull the tabs. That is an open all. It's the exact same thing. And that is why the Charitable Gambling Board, I suspect, has allowed these since the beginning, since 2012. Again, we have not done anything wrong or illegal. There's no court case that says that. It just says the gambling board, if it wants to set a standard and create a rule, they need to go through proper rulemaking process. But they don't have to do it. They could just leave it the way it is. And folks, 90% of the games, of the e-pull tabs, have an open all feature. And that is the common thing across this country. That is the norm across the country. So why would we even consider changing what we have? Why would we hurt our communities across the state? Why would we hurt our charities across the state? It's working. It's working, and it's paying for, amongst other things, a stadium, and probably, my guess is other stadiums down the road. It's working. So I ask members to support the amendment, and I will stand down. Thank you. And I will be asking for a roll call on this.
Representative Anderson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion. Representative Gomez.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So that was a lot. There was a lot there, and we'll go through it bit by bit here. So some of the facts were accurate. In 2012, the Minnesota legislature passed, Governor Dayton signed into law, the legalization of electronic pull tabs. But part of that deal was with the sovereign tribal nations on whose land Minnesota stands, on whose land we all stand right now. Minnesota is 100% ceded treaty lands. And so part of that 2012 deal was very explicitly that electronic pull tabs were designed to be facsimiles of paper pull tabs. And they must be open like paper pull tabs, which means that a player should activate or open each pull tab ticket and each line and row therein. And that they could not include, the design could not include representations that mimic a video slot machine. That was part of the original deal in 2012. So we talk a lot in this chamber about norms and conventions of this institution. We're stewards of this institution today. A lot of people were stewards of it before us and will be afterwards. So we're here in this moment, stewards of this institution. And we talk about norms, and we talk about conventions, and some of the norms of this institution help us to navigate changes in power and kind of like help to keep us all focused on what our work here is, and our work here is for the people of Minnesota. But we're very clear in this moment that there is a norm of this institution that we will not be upholding. And that is the norm of breaking our promises to tribal communities, to tribal nations, to sovereign tribal nations, on whose land we are currently standing. So we are breaking from that convention, and we're breaking from that norm here today with this language. And so that context, that piece of context, of omitted context, is very important when we're considering the measures that are included in the tax bill related to charitable gaming and to the e-pull tabs. We will be keeping our promises. We are stewards of this institution, And although I didn't make this promise in 2012, and most of us didn't, this institution, this state government, made promises to the sovereign tribal nations, the 11 federally recognized sovereign tribal nations on whose land we stand, and we will be keeping our promises. And that's a fact. Now, nobody disputes, because as you said, Representative Anderson, you distributed these lists. Nobody disputes that there are organizations in each of our districts that do important work with these dollars. And we've heard loud and clear from them. We've heard loud and clear from them. But what we are actually talking about here is one small thing about the design of e-pull tabs. The people who come and tell you this will destroy e-pull tabs, they're shooting e-pull tabs in the head, this is going to destroy e-pull tabs, it's not so. We're going from touching a screen one time to touching a screen one time to go to the new e-pull tab, and one time each in the case of, they're mostly 3 lines, right? 3 touches. We're going from 1 touch to 4 touches. We're adding maybe 3 seconds to the time that it takes to play one of these e-pull tabs. And so we have an industry, you know, that I was happy to listen to, and we received a lot of testimony from them. But we heard you repeat something that I just find so absurd, I gotta say. It's going to decrease the revenue 20 to 60%. So at first I heard that, I'm like, man, that's a lot. Like, that's a lot. So I started asking a couple questions. I was like, I mean, where did that come from? And people are like, well, I mean, you know, well, there isn't a study because nobody's done this. And so it's like, how do you know that you're being like fed a made up statistic if it says something like 20 to 60%? Like, what does that even mean? I literally don't know. But what they're asking us to believe is that having somebody going from touching a screen 1 time to touching a screen 4 times is going to mean that all those people who enjoy playing e-pull tabs are going to say, you know what, take this device back, I'm done, I'm never doing this again. It strains, I mean, it's kind of an incredible assertion. And as I said, there's obviously a lot of energy around this, there's a lot of feeling around this. As we said, there are great things that happen because of this money that's going into these organizations in all of our communities. But this small change to the e-pull tab open all feature, and you're right, the appeals court did say that the language in statute is vague. And guess what we're doing? We're clarifying the language in statute. That's what this does. That's what we're doing. And so, you know, we have to kind of take a little step back from some of the alarmist kind of quote unquote information that's being shared with us by an organized, powerful lobbying interest group who a lot of us are appreciative of, but nonetheless, that's what they're doing. We have to weigh that against whether, in this moment, when it's our choice, we're going to keep our promises. And I'm very clear, and our caucus is very clear, that we're choosing to keep our promises. I would urge a red vote on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. So many. The member from Dakota, Representative Hudella.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My friend Wade served a full 20 years in the Special Forces. He was shot 9 times rescuing a hostage in Afghanistan. His body armor picked up 6 of those rounds. 3 of the rounds got through to him, mostly in his arm and in his hands, but he ended up in Walter Reed for a while and then VA Medical Center going through recovery. How I met Wade, how we became friends now, I run a military nonprofit when I'm not here. We receive a lot of revenues from electronic pull tabs. I had gotten a letter from this individual before I knew Wade thanking me for the equipment donation that my organization sent. It allowed his kids to be able to play hockey, and his letter went on about how our organization was able to give his entire family something positive to rally around during their darkest times. This is an individual that was inches away from death, that shouldn't have made it back, but he did. This bill will directly damage organizations like mine. It will reduce the amount of proceeds that we receive. It simply will. We receive support from many of the organizations that are on this list that came out. And to me, that doesn't make sense. I know there are a lot of very reasonable people. It was mentioned that we all have these organizations in the district. These are real people in our community, real people like Wade that we are helping every day. And to me, it doesn't make sense for organizations like mine to be able to help less people like Wade in order to pay back a major donor.
Discussion. Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All right, this is a really important issue because in Blaine, the Blaine Hockey Association generates, just in the last 12 months, $13 million just from e-pull tabs. And if you have kids who play hockey, you know hockey is very expensive. It is expensive even with this charitable piece, and it will only get more expensive. And this whole debate's about this current game has an open all feature that needs to be changed. Well, I don't know if you've played pull tabs before, but what human opens a pull tab one line at a time? So it's ridiculous. It's going to be incredibly damaging to Blaine, incredibly damaging to the Blaine Hockey Association, and just for a tiny, meaningless change. But no, it's not meaningless because it's going to cost significant money. So we shouldn't be doing this. This is a completely unnecessary change that is going to cost the Blaine Hockey Association real dollars because their current game will be illegal, and then they have to reapprove a whole new game that we know will generate less money for hockey in Blaine.
Discussion. The member from Sibley, Representative Harder.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Anderson, for bringing forth this amendment. I appreciate it. Everybody should have gotten that that email about e-gaming, and you should have received one from me. As I said, hello, fellow representatives. I am a Lions member, and in my district, every city has an organization that volunteers and raises money. So as a member of the Henderson Lions, we're a small group of about 18 people, and we do the e-gaming. And in 2022, we raised roughly $23,000. And most of the money is used to support youth in our area. And I just want to share a few things of the good work that we do. So we support the robotics team, the new Minnesota New Country School in Henderson. We have provided funds for smart boards. In the school district of Leeser Henderson, we provide scholarships. We also provide diabetic response kits for the kids that have diabetes. In the St. Anne's School District, we have provided funds for playground equipment. We provide funds for Special Olympics. We provide funds for parks. So this amendment is important to me because it does affect me personally, because we do good work on behalf of the people of our area. So please support this amendment. Thank you.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And I know we're trying to move this along, but I just want to let everyone know that every member on our side of the aisle wants to speak to this. And so those of us who have had the opportunity to speak know that their concerns are echoed by everybody on our side of the aisle. And I just want to go back to a couple things of why this is important to our local charities. First of all, how it was done. This wasn't in a bill. This just showed up in committee, and they were blindsided, and they feel so betrayed. I have a very small VFW in Hamel, the Osseo Maple Grove American Legion. They were calling me, texting. The gentleman from the Osseo Maple Grove American Legion was able to make it and testify. But so many more people want to weigh in on this. They weren't brought in as stakeholders and coming up with a deal or trying to figure out how we can manage this. They were just told, the rug is pulled out from under you, your number one revenue source is going away. And they feel betrayed. And that's why we are fighting so hard for the charities on this. They do so much good work in our communities, and they pay more in taxes than they have left over to give out in our communities. Members, that's bonkers, to quote Representative Neu Brindley. So I just urge a green vote on this amendment because this is not the right time. And just to do this so quickly when they have had no time to prepare, when there is no sense of why this is happening in the middle of the tax bill, members, this is not the right policy to do. It will undercut our charities, and they are devastated by this. Some of our charities may close. So I urge a green vote on this amendment, and I look forward to everyone getting on board to support helping our local charities survive.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Representative Chair Gomez spoke about promises made. Well, and she wasn't in the room when those promises were made. I was. Part of the negotiations to get the Viking Stadium built. I was there when the promise was made that they were going to use these electronic pull tabs and they were not supposed to look like slot machines. And that's what they put in statute, and it may be a little vague, but that was the promise that was made in the room when the decision was made, and the tribe said, okay. And now we want to go back on that promise. We need to fulfill that promise and support this provision in the bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the member who's voting remotely.
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 64 ayes and 64 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Hey, Sean, let me double check. Next amendment is the A32. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Robbins moves to amend House File number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A32.
Representative Robbins to the A32 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry, I thought we were doing the A28 on my list, so I wasn't ready, but here we go. So members, I am rising and asking you to support the A32, which directs the Department of Revenue to use the money that's in the bill for the film tax credit to instead be used to increase the dependent exemption. Members, I had a bill this session that was trying to provide tax relief to families. It would have doubled the existing dependent exemption, and I really feel that it's important when we think about tax policy to make sure that it's broadly applicable. And so that bill never got a hearing, as did most of my bills not get a hearing, but I wanted to draw attention to this issue. One of the ways that I think it would help families most is if we, instead of doing lots of little credits and little deductions and things, that we just gave them an increase in the dependent exemption, because then they can use it how they want. Families have so many different needs that we can't possibly anticipate, they can't possibly anticipate. For those of you who've had children, you know, just things come up. And so giving families the flexibility by an increase in the dependent exemption, I think is good for families and good for tax policy. So since that bill didn't get a hearing, I thought I would like to at least offer this amendment and make a small attempt at improving the dependent exemption. So I urge a green vote. Thank you.
Discussion on the Robbins A32 amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Robbins. I think that we share a commitment to making sure that families and young people have benefit from this bill. That being said, I would ask members to vote no. We do have kind of a balanced approach between our credits and our, that are for, for this purpose, for encouraging economic development through film and TV in our state, and that direct assistance to families who need it. So I appreciate the amendment and appreciate the discussion, but I would ask members to vote no. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, members. I would like to request a roll call.
Representative Robbins requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Madam
Representative
Speaker.
Robbins.
Thank you. And
Sorry, it was Representative Quam was waving, so I was laughing. Representative Robbins.
Thank you. Well, members, I urge a green vote. We need to do more for our families, and it shouldn't be based on just individual circumstances that might not be broadly applicable. This is good tax policy. Vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the name of the member voting remotely.
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 69 noes, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Kosnick moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A33.
The member from Dakota, Representative Kosnick.
Members, the A33 amendment is an effort to strengthen our families and encourage our families that are being decimated by the $10 billion in tax increases and fees in this budget. And so we should be able to take a little bit of the funds and encourage families who will be hurt hardest under this budget. The dependent care credit will help more middle-class families in Minnesota and help them care for their children. I ask for support of this amendment as families will be facing $9.5 billion in tax increases and some additional fees if they're renewing their auto tabs, if they're purchasing something, the sales tax is being increased on them, if they purchase a new car, if they renew their tabs, and a whole variety of other fees are being thrown against Minnesotans. And it's amazing to think that when we have a $17.5 billion surplus, that Democrats are raising taxes $9.5 billion. And with this increase in taxes, government is growing by 40% under the Democrats' plan. I urge your support of this amendment for the dependent care credit to help Minnesota families that will be paying the $10 billion in fees and taxes.
Discussion. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Kosnick. I mean, again, I'm going to start by saying that I think we share a concern about the realities of trying to afford childcare in our state and in this economy.
You just need to move some papers.
Oh.
There we go.
Oh, weird.
Representative
Okay,
Gomez.
Never seen that happen before. Representative Kosnick has worked really hard on this over several years. We couldn't fit it into what we did here. We made a kind of a call that we were really going to go all in on child poverty this year. But, you know, I really appreciate the work that's happened on the child and dependent care credit. The fact of the matter, right, is that families have trouble finding care in Minnesota. It is just so expensive. It's in some cases as expensive as a university education. This is especially hard if you have, you know, several little ones who are preschool aged. But, you know, as I said before, also, though, we have kind of designed a balanced bill that we want to bring into conference. This is very much in the conversation. You know, a much bigger position is in the Senate bill, and so we're going to be having those conversations in conference. And so on this one today, I would ask members to vote no, but please know that we share a concern about this issue, about affordability and quality care for our youngest learners. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. Representative Kosnick.
Chair Gomez, thank you for those comments. I'm glad that there is some agreement. It's unfortunate that you said we couldn't fit it into the budget. Members, we have a 40% growth in the state government budget that's being proposed, $72 billion with a B, and we're asking for $44 million extra. Representative Kosnick, I actually appreciated your bill and was thinking of authoring one on my own, but instead I decided to support yours, and I hope that we really can continue to empower families and encourage them to provide for their children as best they can. It is very expensive. I remember when I had my two daughters were at the same time both in childcare. Those are tough to manage financially, but we figure out a way to get through it. I was blessed to have a good daycare nearby. And it is expensive, and I think this helps more families absorb the cost of life, increased inflation, but unfortunately $10 billion worth of taxes are thrown at them as well. But once I got done paying for the child care, I realized how much extra money we had, and it allowed us to buy a bigger house so that we could house our kids. And so I hope that we will continue to do more work in this area and empower families and encourage families with children to be able to care for them so critically. So members, I ask for your support, and Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call.
Representative Kosnick requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the name of the member voting remotely.
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. Kosnick votes aye. There being 58 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Witty moves to amend House File Number 1938. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A55.
The member from Dakota, Representative Witty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A55 directs Department of Revenue to use $44.3 million from the film tax credit to raise income eligibility for homestead credit. We all have heard, and I've heard in my district of Lakeville, the rising property taxes and how it's hurting our families. I actually heard of one who actually had to sell his property because he was overwhelmed by the rise in his property tax. Around the state, there needs something to be an ongoing direct property tax relief. Although there is a one-time property tax relief in this bill, this issue is affecting many Minnesotans, and we need to provide direct ongoing tax relief to the middle-class Minnesota families. When I was going door to door talking to people in my district, I heard over and over that Minnesotans want a meaningful, permanent tax relief. Minnesotans have been hit hard by inflation and rising property tax, and they're asking for this relief. This is a tax bill that does not provide that. My amendment addressed that and by providing more ongoing property tax relief. I hope you can support my amendment. Thank you.
Discussion to the Witty amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Witty. Again, we've all heard from our residents about what's going on with property taxes in our state. And Representative Lissagard's property tax division spent almost all their time working on this issue. And what has happened is a sort of confluence of a couple different things. As I talked about in my introduction, the amount of LGA that we were sending out to local governments in 2022 without our modifications would be the same as the amount we were sending out in 2002. So let's all think about what's happened to the price of literally everything in the last 20 years. So our investments in our local governments are not keeping up with the cost of delivering services to our residents. We have a similar situation in education. If you look at the state share of education funding from 2002 to 2022, it's pretty flat. And so what has happened is that more and more of that cost is getting put on to the property tax levies that we all pay, whether we're homeowners or we're renters, by the way. And then in the last couple of years, we've had this huge increase in valuation in the homestead sector. And so obviously the way that levies work is it sort of like is within kind of the property tax base that shifts happen onto different categories of property. And so what we've seen is a big shift onto homesteads. And we respond to that in a number of ways in our bill, and specifically in Chair Lislegard's Property Tax Division report. There is $85 million of ongoing property tax refunds that go to homeowners. We have a one-time infusion, which we had space in our first biennium budget, and so we were able to respond to kind of the conditions on the ground today with a one-time infusion of property tax refunds for both homeowners and renters, and that's $125 million almost. The other piece is a bill from Representative Norris, which is special one-time targeted property tax refunds. And so what that one does, the other property tax refunds are targeted based on income, but this one, it's like whatever your income is, if year over year you saw a 6% increase in your property tax bills, then you're eligible for a refund. And so we really carefully designed the property tax refund approach in our bill to kind of meet those dual goals of both responding to, what's going on today and what's been going on in the last couple years, and then also to help people on an ongoing basis moving forward. So there are a couple of issues with this proposal, unfortunately. This actually, when we adopted the Engen amendment about reducing the film tax credit to pay for a sales tax holiday for baby products and school supplies, it kind of puts these amendments out of balance, but we're sort of just having the conversation, but I wanted to mention that at the front. This excludes renters, which is a big issue from my perspective, because everybody pays property taxes. And so when we make changes to the homestead property tax refund and we don't include renters, we are further kind of reinforcing this inequity that already exists in the property tax refund system between those who own their homes and those who rent. Because if you own your home, the kind of threshold under which you receive a property tax refund is twice what it is if you're a renter. So that's an issue. And I guess again, we're trying to take our bill into conference. We have a balanced approach to property tax refunds, to these credits. And so I would ask respectfully, Madam Speaker, for a no vote on the A55. Thank you.
Discussion. Representative Witty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that, Chair Gomez, and I appreciate you understanding that the property tax on our Minnesota families are hurting them. Unfortunately, not every city gets LGA. And where I am honored and privileged to serve Lakeville, we do not. And so that is going to have an effect. I hope that is in part of your discussions as you move into conference and you understand it. And that obviously, I appreciate you understanding that. So thank you.
Madam Speaker, request a roll call.
Representative Kosnick requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Witty moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A59.
Representative Witty, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the leniency on the roll call freshman mistake, but I do ask for a roll call.
Good strategy. Representative Witty requests a roll call. Seeing Representative Quam waving at me and a few other hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Witty.
The A59 redirects $30 million from the St. Paul Street improvements to public safety aid for our police and firefighters for mental health. As I spoke yesterday, our law enforcement is hurting mentally, physically, and also our firefighters. And this will be an opportunity to put some money into helping them with their needs. At my old department, they have a comfort dog that is around the department for scenes. We're seeing different programs started at our PDs and fire departments. So I would hope that you could support this amendment. Thank you.
Discussion on the Witty amendment. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is working, yes? Okay, there we go. Representative Witty, thank you so much, first of all, for highlighting the issue of mental health for our first responders. You've got firefighters in here and law enforcement officers as well, and grateful for that. In my work as a prosecutor, I see body camera video, and so get to see just from a distance what those individuals experience in their work, and I think that's such an important topic to highlight. I'll circle back to it, but I first want to, you've kind of connected here some funding for St. Paul streets, and then with this law enforcement issue. So just to talk about the St. Paul thing, St. Paul is in a historic hole when it comes to repair of streets. I think we all have noticed this. I will say that today, there was a member of this body that had a blown tire when driving on a St. Paul street. That member did not mind my identifying, Representative Maria Perez-Vega. So this is something that a member of this body experienced just today. So you've all seen this, and there's many reasons for this. There were more than a decade of no property tax levy increase. They're now kind of digging out from that hole. LGA is not tied to inflation, but fundamentally, the fact is that our city has 1/5 of the property is entirely tax exempt, and we're in one place of that ourselves. So there's a real gap between the unmet need and the amount that is received under certified LGA, actually the largest in the state. And that's hundreds of $millions in deferred maintenance. And of course, it's really important that our city streets be paved, both for you and for the many visitors who come in. So St. Paul, in 1 month, has sent in more than $30 million in sales taxes, which actually equals the amount here. I'm grateful to Chair Gomez for including this provision in here. There is a 125-year replacement cycle right now on the street. So Summit Avenue was last replaced when the president was William Howard Taft. Little trivia question about when William Howard Taft was president, a long time ago. So I'm grateful that there is the funding to address this and to recognize the need that in our city, when visitors are coming to the city, we make sure that we have those paved streets. So would appreciate members' support regarding that. At the same time, it's so critical to recognize all that we are doing in the various budget bills that we are passing regarding our first responders and their mental health. Just yesterday in the public safety budget was funding authored by Representative Curran, for the development of first responder mental health curriculum. So we had that yesterday. There was the first responder equine therapy grant that Representative Kosnick authored. That was in the budget we passed yesterday. There was, of course, tremendous investment on our law enforcement in the budget we passed yesterday. Lots of mental health for public safety employees coming up in the bill on Monday from Representative Herr, House File 1234. There's quite a bit there. And then, of course, we have greatly increased funding for local government aid, for county program aid, thanks to Chair Zeleznikar and Chair Gomez, that can go towards this as well. So this is absolutely critical. I should say just 1.2 on this amendment is that this amendment would not provide mental health support for our part-time and on-call firefighters who do such important work all around the state, and this would do nothing for them. So for all those reasons, members, I would respectfully request a no vote on the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Witty, for bringing this amendment. You know, there's a lot I could say about this, but the first thing is that this is a direct appropriation to a city in the tax bill. It doesn't belong here, and I agree the roads in St. Paul aren't great, but that's really a local government issue. And the governor proposed $300 million in public safety aid. That did come to the tax committee, but it's not included in the tax bill. And so Representative Witty is taking just just a little bit, 30 million from an appropriation to fix potholes, and instead giving it to first responders for mental health. Because the governor's request was not funded. So members, this is an important amendment for all our law enforcement communities. The previous speaker said, you know, how important it is our streets are safe. I really agree. And our streets are safe when our first responders are getting the support they need to do their jobs every day. So please vote green.
Discussion. Somebody just stood up and waved. Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With what Representative Pinto said, we have to get started someplace, you know, and that's why I appreciate Representative Witty's bill. We get started someplace, because if we continue to do nothing, nothing gets done. And like Representative Robbins just has shared, it is so important that we are able to support the individuals, fire, police, and ambulance that runs to our problems. So I will be supporting. I would ask other members to do the same. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's voting remotely?
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 66 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Quam moves to amend House Law number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A48.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I won't be doing jazz or dancing fingers on this one. Members, I probably have the only district where I've got a large number of constituents outraged by 20, 30% or more increases in valuation or property tax. I'm sure it's just isolated in my district, which to the people watching, you know that's not true. Across the state, there's been a huge amount of this. And frankly, that kind of sudden and unexpected change is tough. It's a shock. What are you going to do for, paying the property taxes, et cetera? And that's one of the reasons why I did several bills with different approaches on how can we prevent that from happening. None got hearings, but the idea is we should not have huge shifts in property valuations or property taxes. A lot of people say, well, we've got refunds. You know, if we didn't have the huge shifts, we wouldn't be spending a lot of money on refunds. We wouldn't have people figuring out how to fill out this form and that form and then submit specially for property tax refunds. We should get it so that it's more predictable and we get rid of it. The easiest would be to say, put a 10% or lower cap on an annual increase. That's a logical thing. But local government and other entities don't like that. So being a math type person, I said, well, if we want to get rid of extremes, we do a 5-year rolling average, and that smooths out these bumps. I think the increase is fine on if somebody bought a piece of property and it's quite a bit more than what the evaluation is. You buy a piece of property, that's what you should be assessed at. And in the amendment I have where you keep, if it's purchased, then you go to that purchase price as the assessed value. That's what the market defines it as, and I think that's a good indicator. For all the other ones, you'd have a 5-year rolling average so that you would soften the increase. It wouldn't be these sharp changes. And I think that is a way we could get rid of the shock and not awe that we're seeing. At least that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people. And I think that's only fair. Predictability would be a good thing. And if we really tweak it in and get things right, then we can get rid of the extra forms to fill out for this property tax refund because it's such a much percent increase in this or that. A lot of people, they get confused about it. They want a bottom line. Let's do something for it. So I ask for a green vote.
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Quam, for always bringing your most creative and interesting ideas into committees. This amendment was brought forward when we were doing the markup of the property tax division report. And I'm really interested in this idea, actually, and I hope that we can work on it more. Because I think that, you know, when we look, when we were talking about Representative Witty's amendment on property tax refunds, I kind of talked about what's happened in property tax valuations over the last couple years. And the way that kind of big increase in the valuation in the homestead sector has impacted property tax bills. And so that's what this is designed to sort of protect against, is that, you know, like a lot of people who, even if they own a home that's getting more valuable, you know, have a fixed income and don't have the liquid cash to pay some of these bills when there's really major kind of changes in them year to year. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask members to vote no on this today because as we discussed in the division report, we haven't quite kind of gamed out all of the impacts that this will have on city and county and school levies, their interactions with tax increment financing and other kind of programs. And so this would be a really huge change to the way that our local partners calculate property tax levies today. And so it needs more work, and I think we should continue to talk about this. Representative Quam, again, about this issue of if there are ways to sort of safeguard against those huge kind of fluctuations year to year. But unfortunately, I think this isn't quite ready for us to implement this year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion on the Quam amendment. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Quam amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Zeleznikar moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A44.
And before I have Representative Zeleznikar explain her amendment, we're having a little audio distortion, so people can make sure that their microphones are all the way in their spot. That might help. The member from St. Louis, Representative Zeleznikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is a simple amendment, and you've heard me speak many times. I'm sure you're tired of the topic of nursing homes. But the A44 just redirects $30 million from St. Paul Street improvement to the 300 nursing homes that are in the state of Minnesota. So I feel that it's relevant. The seniors that are in these nursing homes have paid taxes their entire life. And I've heard from many people that perhaps if we're going to legalize pot in Minnesota, that pot money goes to potholes across the state. So I hope members will consider this friendly amendment and allocate some money for the nursing homes so we can make sure that they are in a better position for today and tomorrow. Thank you, members.
Discussion on the Zeleznikar amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Zeleznikar, for your work on this issue. And, I think when we heard Chair Noor's bill the other day, we talked a lot about the needs in this sector, and the needs are real. And I'd want to acknowledge that, and that we have across our sort of care economies, we have a crisis. And, part of that is about wages, and it's about the extraction of profit from things like nursing homes and other forms of health care. That's a big concern. But, again, I guess I would ask members to vote no on this amendment. We did do some grants for nursing homes, again, when we passed the Human Services Bill. And, I just would go back to Representative Pinto's remarks. We have a lot of people who visit our capital city. We have very real needs. We have this infrastructure, public infrastructure that was funded originally by public money, and we have an obligation to maintain it. A 125-year replacement cycle on roads that are supposed to be replaced in like half that time is not acceptable. And and so I just we put this aid for St. Paul in here to acknowledge the fact that for our capital city, it's very important that every time somebody comes here, they're not getting a pothole. So I would ask members to vote no on the A44. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion on the Zeleznikar amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Kosnick moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A45.
The member from Dakota, Representative Kosnick.
Thank you, members. Under this bill, there is a $30 million appropriation, as we've discussed, directly to one city. In this Minneapolis and St. Paul budget, under this tax bill, $30 million of that goes to St. Paul. And what the A45 amendment does is takes that $30 million that should have actually been appropriated through the transportation bill, which, by the way, increases taxes $3.45 billion. But this provision never got a hearing in the tax committee to give St. Paul $30 million. But what the A45 does is helps our small businesses, 50 employees and under, mostly average middle-class Minnesotans, helps them by creating a small business grant for businesses that are affected by a new paid family leave, earned and sick time proposals. We need, it's hard to understand, but the Democrats are so proud of their tax plan that's raising $9.5 billion in taxes on Minnesotans. Amazingly, we have a historic surplus, but our spending is out of control, and the people that are going to be hurt the most are our average Minnesota families and small businesses. And so the A45 amendment will create a grant program to help offset these businesses that are hurt by the billion-dollar paid family leave plans. And so, members, I ask for your support in better using the appropriation for St. Paul. And Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, I still request a roll call. I counted them.
Representative Kosnick, I was just trying to figure out your math on some of the things you were saying that I questioned. But your math on the hands is pretty good. There are 15, so there will be a roll call. Representative Kosnick.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The math is we have a $17.5 billion surplus, historic surplus, that people in all communities across the state of Minnesota, and especially the people that I've talked to in the district I represent, we're expecting some tax relief with that over collection of revenues. The other part that's amazing, and it's hard to add up, I don't blame the speaker, $9.5 billion in tax increases. And then if you add in some of the fees on fishing licenses and things like that, it's probably closer to $10 billion. But anyways, I would ask members' support to provide some relief to our small businesses that are going to be facing and having to pay a lot of these tax increases.
Discussion to the Kosnick amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Kosnick. I mean, paid family medical leave isn't in law yet, so this refers to something that doesn't actually exist yet, so that's an interesting part of it. But we appreciate, the assumption that we will be providing workers in our state with this critical benefit that every other industrialized country in the world manages to provide for their employees, that a lot of places that are much less prosperous than the United States provide to their employees. Time to care for their sick relatives, time to care for their babies when they have a newborn. And so we also are looking forward to that moment when working people in this state are no longer outliers in the world in not having access to paid family and medical leave. And I know that we're going to have a lot of really great discussions about that next week. But for today, I would ask for a no vote on the A45. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. Representative Kosnick.
Madam Speaker, I would request the members' support with a green vote.
The clerk will take the roll on the A45 amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's voting remotely?
Richardson.
Okay, go ahead.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 66 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Robbins moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A29.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise and request a roll call.
Representative Robbins requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the A29 cuts the bottom income tax rate from the current 5.35% to 2.8%. And this is funded, members, just so you're clear, from future surpluses. And we had this discussion on an earlier amendment. And I just want to explain why this is not a gimmick or a trick. This has been done in other states where they put in statute that this is a priority of how they want to do their tax code. And as surplus money becomes available, it is dedicated towards achieving that goal. Iowa has done this for reducing their income tax rate, and I know other states have done it as well. So this is not a gimmick. This is a way to do tax policy. And why it's important is because when you do have a huge surplus like we do right now, $17.5 billion, some of that money, if we already had this in place, would be automatically going to cut the lowest tax rate. And that is good policy. It's very broad. So I just wanted to address the gimmick issue. But now I want to talk about why we need this. So Minnesota has already one of the most progressive tax rates in the country. And part of the tax bill that is before the body today is creating a fifth income tax tier that would give us a highest income tax rate of 10.85%. Members, that gives us the second highest tax rate in the country. And already, where our current highest rate is at 9.85%, we're at the fourth highest. So we are an outlier on tax policy in terms of how high our income tax rates are. So our lowest tax rate, so this is the lowest tax rate for our state, is 5.35%. Members, that is higher than the highest tax rate in 24 other states. This is so uncompetitive. Our lowest tax rate is higher than the highest tax rate in 24 other states. So what this amendment does is it reduces our tax rate from 5.35% to 2.8%, and it will happen, admittedly, over time as surpluses are accumulated, and so it won't happen all at once. But it's very broad. It will affect every person who pays income tax in the state, and it will help make us more competitive. And I really think that we need to think as a body about tax policy. And generally, the idea of a broad base is the most fair. And so that is something that I think is missing in this bill. There are a lot of tax credits and a lot of tax expenditures, but it's very targeted at specific populations. And many of the people who will be receiving those tax benefits do not pay taxes. And so it's a way of spending taxpayer money for certain programs that are run through the tax code, even though those people haven't paid taxes and contributed to creating the $17.5 billion surplus. So members, this is really important because the way that when you have a lot of little tax expenditures like tax credits, it creates winners and losers. And it really is not creating a broad base for the tax code. And so I just want to talk about how this would impact some families in our state. So currently, if you're a family of 6 making $155,000 and have 4 children, you would not be eligible for the rebate checks that are in this tax bill before us. But if you live in the 7-county metro area, you would be subject to the 1% metro-wide sales tax increase that is in this bill. So your taxes would actually go up by $476. And you would be subject to the 75-cent delivery fee in this bill, which has been approximated to be a $150 increase in your taxes. And we are not counting the 30% increase on the tab fee or the payroll tax increases. But the staff did an estimate that that would be another $626 per year. So,
Representative Robbins, I just want to be sure your amendment, you're talking about the tax bill, not the transportation bill.
yes,
Representative Robbins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I am tired. Those are some of those things are in the other bill. I'm sorry, but it's about the total taxes that are going into the budget that we have been debating on this floor day and night for the last 2 weeks. So members, I just want you to know that tax increases are going up all over the place for families, and they are not going to be getting the rebates or the benefits that honestly they kind of think they would or they expected. All of us campaigned on returning the surplus, or most of us did, and it's not happening in this bill. And so members, I'm just trying to provide some tax relief at the very lowest end of the tax code so that it'll make our state more competitive. It'll give a broad relief to families in our state, and it will create better tax policy for our future. So members, please support this amendment to reduce our lowest tax rate. I think I requested roll call? Okay, then please vote green.
Discussion on the Robbins amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Robbins. I appreciate you bringing this bill forward. I wanted to just go back for a moment to this use of the budget reserve, which is frequently, as right now, right, 2/3 one-time money, and we're talking about using one-time dollars for permanent, ongoing, structural tax cuts or spending. So in statute, these are all because there's a few of these amendments that use the November forecast as the source of the funding, and I just wanted to clarify that, you know, before any money would go to any of these efforts, any of these tax cuts, any of these expenditures, first, the cash flow account would have to be paid back, the budget reserve account, the school aid payment schedule to 90%, restoration of previous school aid reductions, and reduction of the property tax shift. Money would have to be transferred to the Minnesota 21st Century Fund. We would reduce or eliminate the June accelerated shift. So all those things would have to happen before any dollars would go to any of these efforts that are funded with the November forecast or the budget reserve. So, you know, we heard like, oh, it's not a trick, it's not a gimmick, it's not weird. I mean, it's a little weird. Maybe it's not a trick or a gimmick, but it's kind of weird. So that's on the budget reserve. And on the first, the reduction, the first tier rate cut, I think this, like, there's something that's really appealing about this, you know, because you hear like, oh, we're gonna cut the bottom tier, the rate. That sounds like something that would mostly benefit like people who really need the help. And you talked about our progressive tax code in Minnesota, and that's true. We have one of the most progressive tax codes in the country, and I'm really proud of it, and we should all be really proud of it. Because it means that we're not disproportionately burdening low-income people with the cost of public goods. We're asking, you know, those higher income people who have been richly rewarded in this economy to contribute a little more to the public good. And as I've said, taxes aren't about punishment. They're actually how we care for each other in a community. They're how we care for each other in any geography, whether it's our neighborhood or our city or our state. Taxes are the reason that we have street lights, and they're the reason that when you call 911, somebody comes, and they're the reason that our kids have access to school, regardless of our ability to pay for it. And so we have a progressive tax system. And actually, when you take into account the fact that we conformed with the doubling of the standard deduction that happened in the 2017 TCJA, and we made that permanent. Whereas at the federal level, it either has already, maybe it's going to expire in, I think, next year, but we made that permanent. So that means that we have more people than almost anywhere in the country who are in that lowest tax bracket, right, where they don't pay taxes between the standard deduction and the dependent exemption. And so, because we have this really progressive income tax system, reducing rates even at that lowest tier, doesn't actually benefit Minnesotans who need it the most. This was proposed previously, and you know, one of the issues here, right, is that we don't know how much this will cost. I haven't seen a revenue estimate. We didn't have a hearing on this, so I'm not exactly sure how much of what the kind of dollar amount that you're trying to shift into that November forecast is. But what I do know is that I looked back, because this, you know, is a proposal that's been around before, and of course, as Representative Robbins knows, we have this kind of the tax incidence study and this way of analyzing what the incidence of tax policy decisions would be. And the incidence study analyzes what income level certain tax policy choices impact. And so what they found was that the top 20% of income earners receive almost 40% of the benefits of a first-tier rate cut, and the bottom 40% of income earners receive 2% of the benefits. I'll say that again. The bottom 40% get just 2% of this benefit. So there's a little bit of like, if you read it, you're like, oh, first-tier rate cut. You're like, oh, that sounds like something that would help out poor people. Well, that's not actually the case here. So, you know, this isn't really ready to roll. We don't actually know how much the cost would be, but what we do know is that previous analysis shows us that this would not help like 500,000 of the lowest income Minnesotans. This spending, whatever it is, we're not sure, would disproportionately go to those top 20% of income earners in our state. And so it undermines the progressive tax code that we have, which is an equitable way to fund the public good, which is what I support and I hope we all are behind. And so I would ask for a red vote on the A29. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion on the Robbins amendment. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Chair Gomez, for that discussion. And in case I haven't said it yet, I really have appreciated being on the tax committee, and I've appreciated your leadership. We've had really fantastic discussions in committee, and so I appreciate that we can have this dialogue on the floor as well. So I do want to go back to a couple of points that you raised, if I can read my money here, or my writing. So one of the things you said is that that you're wanting to see that the wealthy contribute, you phrased it as a little more to the state, even though we already have a progressive tax code. And so, and I do appreciate your citations from the tax incidence study, where you said that the bottom 40% of income earners would get 2% of the benefit. And I don't have my incidence study with me, but I will take you at your word. But one of the reasons for that, members, is because the people who have the lowest incomes generally don't pay taxes. So that's why they're not being affected by this, because they are getting a lot of tax credits and state aid, and so they are not paying taxes. So once you get to the level of the people who are earning enough income and are paying the taxes, then it's a different story. And that is where our middle-class families are, and they are paying a whole lot of taxes. So one of the things that I think a lot of Minnesotans don't know is that the top 10% of Minnesota households, which are those earning more than $164,000, they pay 60% of all of the taxes in the state. So the vast majority, as the chair already said, of the middle class and upper income families are the ones who are paying for the tax burden in our state. So this is just a way, members, to reduce the tax burden for the lowest tier that would help those families who are already paying the lion's share of the taxes in the state, and then it would also make us more competitive. So I really urge members to support this. It's common sense tax policy. We wouldn't get there overnight. And to her point earlier, where she listed all the things that would have to be paid for first, the cash flow, the budget reserve, the rainy day accounts, all those things. That is absolutely correct. But members, those things are fully funded right now, and we have a $17.5 billion surplus. So we have shown that those things are there, and we already have this huge surplus. So I'm just saying, let's use some of the future surpluses to whittle away at that lowest tax rate. It would help families. It would be a broad-based tax policy, and I urge a green vote. And if I didn't ask for a roll call, roll call.
You did request a roll call. There will be a roll call. Any further discussion on the Robbins amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the Robbins amendment.
Hey.
Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's not yet, or who's voting remotely?
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
I think her granddaughter said no, too. The clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hudson moves to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A30.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the A30 amendment would have the effect of requiring future increases in rates, income tax rates, to be approved by the legislature by 2/3 of the members of each house of the legislature. And the reason why I'm bringing this is I'd like us to reflect upon, it's really easy in the work that we do here where we're tossing around numbers in the millions and billions to lose track of what just one of those units means. What is $1? Every dollar represents value. That's what it's there to transact, what it's there to represent. And that value was produced, and it was produced by a person. I heard an interesting turn of phrase from Chair Gomez earlier, talking about those in the upper income tax tiers as being, quote, richly rewarded, unquote. It's interesting language, richly rewarded. I've never regarded one of my paychecks as a reward. It wasn't a prize. It wasn't a grant. It wasn't something that I was given. Every paycheck that I've received has been earned. It's been payment for value added to an employer. And that's true of Minnesotans everywhere, regardless of what income bracket they fit in. Minnesotans earn their money. It's theirs. And every time we appropriate a dollar, we are taking not just the money, but what the money represents. Value that they spent time and effort and applied their intellect to produce. We're taking that from them. We're appropriating it. That's literally the word we use, appropriating their productivity, their labor, to redirect it to what we think it ought to be spent on. And I think that that decision ought to be made with a high degree of sobriety and respect for the audacity of being able and willing to do that. And I'm also interested in trying to advance the goal implicit in the slogan of One Minnesota. I think that Minnesotans A lot of Minnesotans feel like they're getting a lot of stuff that they didn't ask for. A couple of examples that come to the top of mind would be increases in vehicle tab fees, delivery tax added to every order, $9.5 billion in taxes increased overall with a $17.5 billion surplus. These are things that no one was asking for at doors that I knocked or at fairs that I attended, on the side of the roads and parades. Nobody was asking to have their taxes raised by $9.5 billion, but we're giving it to them. It doesn't feel very one Minnesota. It doesn't feel like we're taking everybody's values into consideration. One thing that we commonly do hear when we talk to folks out in the public is we hear a desire for bipartisanship. We hear a desire for us to work together across the aisle. And it can be difficult to explain to folks why that doesn't happen. But one thing is for sure, there's been a shift that's broadly recognized in recent years away from bipartisanship towards sticking into our corners. I was talking to one of our more senior members yesterday, having a chat, and he was reflecting upon a past session when he was a chair of a committee, and the practice that he would have of intentionally engaging with the minority and even offering them bills and saying, hey, why don't you carry this? With the objective of getting to this stage in the process with a bill that had broad bipartisan support. That was a goal. It's a past goal. It's apparently not a current goal. And that's unfortunate because people want that. And again, the slogan of One Minnesota seems to imply that we're going to get broad agreement on the direction that the state is taking. And so that's what this amendment tries to affect. What I'm saying is that if we are going to raise tax rates on Minnesotans, at least 2/3 of us ought to be on board with that idea. And look, if you still want to gang up on the people who you feel have been richly rewarded, who you feel have earned too much, who you feel don't need it, you can still convince 2/3 of people, 2/3 of elected legislators, if that's what their constituents want, to gang up on the other third. We can still do that. But what this provision does is, at the very least, assuming that we're not going to have a supermajority of one party anytime in the near future, ensure that when we make that decision, we're doing so in bipartisan fashion. So I'd ask for a green vote.
Discussion on the Hudson Amendment. Representative Gomez.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So just quickly, when I talked about those highest income earners being richly rewarded by the economy in Minnesota, there's data to back this up. Those making $500,000 and more a year over the 2019 to 2021, their incomes more than doubled, went up 117%. People realizing capital gains during the pandemic went up 147%. During that same time, that time, which I don't need to remind us about, but I'm going to, a time of unprecedented unemployment, a time of suffering, pain, death, literally, in our communities, a time when frontline workers from so many sectors were putting their health on the line and the health of their families on the line. During that time, when people were having trouble making their rent payments, when more Minnesotans than ever were visiting food shelves, during that time, people making $500,000 and more, their incomes went up 117%. During those years, the value of the stock market went up trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars. And here in Minnesota, capital gains went up 147%. At the same time, the lowest income Minnesotans saw their income go down by almost 10%. And when we talk about all economic activity happens in the context of the world, the community that we exist in, which, as I mentioned, is heavily subsidized by the public. The roads, the streetlights, the emergency services, the schools, care for our elders that we all count on. This is the public good. And no, I don't think it's punishment to ask someone whose income doubled during one of the most profound economic crises, certainly of my lifetime, to ask them to pay a couple dollars extra is not punishment to me. And to acknowledge the reality that there were winners and losers in our economy is just that. It's just acknowledging reality. It's just saying by the numbers. There were winners and there were losers. And there are people who have not recovered. And the recovery has not been equal. It has not been equitable. And so I stand by that. I believe that, again, that this is how we take care of those among us who need a hand. It's easy to be like, oh, taxes are terrible, but like, let's talk about what taxes buy. What's terrible about it? What are you going to cut? Is it the kindergartners? Is it the streetlights? Is it the fire response? I mean, you know, we all want to talk about like these, so, you know, we're all free market believers until you really get into the details of what that means. Like, should only people who can afford it be able to send their kids to school? Should communities only have access to roads and the post office if they can pool their resources together and support those public services? Because my community could do it. We could come together and pool our resources and pay for a post office. Is that true across the state of Minnesota? That's what the public good is. That's what our taxes buy. As to this amendment, I guess, you know, California requires a 2/3 vote to approve taxes. The US Senate requires a 2/3 vote for most things. And personally, I'm not for gridlock, so I would recommend a red vote. Don't be like the US Senate, don't be like California. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion to the Hudson Amendment. Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Chair Gomez, I appreciate the fact that not only can you recognize creativity, you can also engage in it. That was very, very entertaining. Look, changing the threshold from 50% to 2/3 in no way prevents us from doing any of the things that you described. But setting that aside, I am interested in responding to some of those points. And actually, I'll start by introducing one that I think is a glaring omission from your consideration, and that's the concept of sustainability. Because again, the question of what should we cut, what public good doesn't deserve to be funded, is really a secondary question that needs to come after the primary question, which is, where does this money come from? Where is it? And how did it get there? And how are we going to obtain it? And how sustainable is it year over year, biennium over biennium, session after session, to continue taking more and more of it from the people who produce it? And the answers to those questions will determine, or at least set the stage for, our consideration of your questions, Chair Gomez. You speak of the pandemic, which is an interesting pivot. and all of the increase in economic disparity which took place as a result of that phenomenon. That's an interesting perspective. I think it's worth noting that the COVID-19 virus didn't shut down a single business. The COVID-19 virus didn't lock us in our homes. The COVID-19 virus didn't shut down our schools. It didn't arbitrarily select which workers were essential and which ones weren't. It didn't arbitrarily decide what big corporate businesses were worthy of remaining open while the rest of Main Street and small businesses were closed. COVID-19 didn't decide that. The state of Minnesota did. And I don't want to be called out of order, so I won't evoke any particular person, but we all know how our government works, right? Okay? And the responsibility wasn't just held in one particular office, it was held by everybody who was in this chamber and the other one at the time, because you all could have stopped it at any point and made life better for all those people who you're now talking about, whose lives have been made worse as a result of the government action that was taken to halt their ability to produce what they need in order to live. You're actually making my point. People need to work in order to make money in order to live. That's where money comes from. So maybe we should respect that more before we make such broad, sweeping, deeply impactful decisions. And that's what this amendment is trying to accomplish. Let's have deeper consideration. Let's have broader support. Let's broaden it out from one person deciding that everything shuts down to making sure we actually have a broad conversation and broad agreement on policies that impact everyone in this state. I'll ask for a roll call vote and ask you to vote green.
Representative Hudson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll. Any further discussion to the Hudson amendment? The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member voting remotely?
Richardson.
There you go.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Olson B. moved to amend House File Number 1938, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A25.
The member from Martin, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this amendment's very simple. We talked a lot today about promises that were made to different people groups, to different individuals, promises that were made to voters and our constituents. There was another promise that was made. It was a promise by the city of Minneapolis that they would, in fact, pay a portion of the stadium. There are conversations being had right now, and there's language in this bill that would basically allow Minneapolis to be off the hook should the state of Minnesota pay for the stadium early. They would let them off the hook for the remainder of their obligation. Now, members, we've talked about how in this House, in this area, bills are moral documents. Well, there are actually legal documents that say we, in fact, need to do something. The city of Minneapolis should not be let off the hook when we're talking about a stadium, especially given that in the near future, our stadium will need maintenance. We will, in fact, have to spend money to upkeep this excellent way of bringing people to our state. It's a great thing, it's a great asset, and it's amazing that our charities have been able to really carry the state in paying for this stadium. If we do, in fact, pay for it ahead of time, the city of Minneapolis should not be let off the hook. The city of Minneapolis, who has been blessed to have this stadium, should, in fact, devote that monies, that fund should go towards the maintenance of that stadium so that years from now, when that stadium does in fact need some maintenance, we don't see the city of Minneapolis asking the state of Minnesota for funds to assist them in maintaining that building. If we take this money, put it in the reserve account in order to utilize it at a later date for the maintenance of this stadium, as the occupants of that stadium have asked, we will not have to revisit this conversation at a later date. They will, in fact, have the money available to maintain that stadium, and we will not have to sit here on the House floor years from now when the ancient sages of this room can stand up and say, I was there when we had that conversation. We won't have to have that because, in fact, the money will already be there because the city of Minneapolis signed a legal, not just a moral document, but a legal document saying that they would, in fact, fulfill their obligations. Let's have them do that. Let's make it so that the sages of the floor of the Minnesota House of Representatives does not have to come up and say, I was there when we had that discussion. Let's just not have it. Let's have Minneapolis fulfill their obligations. Please vote green. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Olson, did you just call Representative Nelson ancient? Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It was nice of you to call him a sage, too, I guess, as long as you're going to go down that road. So I would ask for a no vote on this. The city of Minneapolis is on the hook over the course of this deal of 25 years for $1 billion. $1 billion. I've lived in Minneapolis almost my whole life. I've actually never even been in the stadium, but my kids and my grandkids are going to be paying for it under the current scheme. So, you know, there is talk, because of the balance in the stadium reserve, of renegotiating this deal. So, you know, there's talk of paying off the bonds early. And if we're going to renegotiate this deal, then we're going to address the fact that the city of Minneapolis, in owning this, is paying for this statewide asset to the tune of $1 billion. But I do agree with you. So this is a $1 billion facility, and my understanding is that like every single piece of it basically is custom made, because it's not like there's like US Bank Stadium store that you can go to. And over the course of the 25 years of this deal, of course, Minneapolis is paying into capital improvement reserves, but it's $73 million over the 25 years, which is not adequate to maintain a $1 billion facility where every single piece of it is custom. And so, you know, so I agree with that part, and that's very much a part of these conversations. The stadium exists. I wasn't personally here, you know, when it happened. But I will tell you that if the terms of the deal are being renegotiated, then we're going to just take another look at whether it makes sense, you know, once the bonds are paid off, for Minneapolis to continue to pay on bonds that are paid off. We're going to have this conversation about how it is that once we're in, right, we've created a public agency to own it, so it's like a publicly owned facility. And we know that these things always kind of degrade over time, and that the public will be on the hook for this, if and when that happens. Not the billionaire guy who lives in New Jersey, who's the one really benefiting from this, whose asset that he owns, this team, is appreciating in value because of this public money that he's gotten. But the people of the state will be on the hook if we don't figure out how to properly maintain this. And so on that, we are very much in alignment. And, you know, I want to assure you that as these conversations move forward, that that's a part of kind of the deal that needs to be looked at. Because there are sort of a number of strange things about this deal, let's say. So I would ask for a red vote on this. These conversations are ongoing. If you have insight about maintenance of the facility, please let's talk, because I saw that and I was surprised, honestly, at how low it is over the course of the kind of useful life of this facility. So thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Olson.
Discussion. Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the chair for the very candid conversation about, I'm very appreciative that you are taking this into account, understanding that we have made agreements, we have agreements with each other, we have agreements with other cities, and that there will in fact be maintenance requirements. So I very much appreciate that. With that being said, I would appreciate a roll call on this amendment.
Representative Olson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the chair for recognizing that we do in fact need to meet our obligations, and I appreciate the conversation of continuing to discuss those obligations. I think, though, that this needs to be stricken from the bill today so we can continue those conversations without tying our hands up. And for the record, Madam Speaker, a sage does not necessarily have to be ancient.
The clerk will take the roll on the Olson amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's voting remotely?
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 66 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move a recess to the call of the Speaker until 7 p.m. sharp.
Representative Long moves a recess to the call of the chair until 7 p.m. sharp. Representative Long, could you define the word sharp? Representative Long.
One more time, Madam Speaker.
Could you define the term sharp?
Bright and intelligent as per C. Speaker Hortman.
I meant more in the nature of exactly. Representative Long moves a recess to the call of the chair until exactly 7 o'clock. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say no. The House stands in recess until 7 o'clock.